I've been recording a lot of podcasts recently, and it's dope, right? But it's interesting and it's weird because I've been recording so many of them that I'm now having more conversations with strangers than I am with my own friends and family. Well, first off, I say strangers because every one of these people who come on the podcast have no fucking clue who I am. You can't Google my name. I think maybe you can. Rough Paws will probably come up. But I'm not a Googleable dude. I don't think. I've never actually even Googled myself. I'm not going to start now. But, so people come on and, we're strangers. But I've been recording so many of them that I've been a lot of conversations. And I woke up this morning, the weather's been dope in SF. Everyone's in a good mood. And I woke up and I'm there's some people who are important to me, good friends, and I'm trying to, I'd like to be more communicative towards them. So I gave one of my friends a call, and it was a check-in with him. I wasn't expecting him to check in with me. Wasn't what the call was about. It was more of, I wanted to check in with him. Not for a good reason or bad reason, simply just to hear what someone else close to me has going on. I almost treated the phone conversation, not like a podcast, but I guess I kind of did. The podcast has allowed me to let people or develop more of a skill to allow people to just speak and not interrupt them, which I've always had a tendency to do. Let it unfold. And it's amazing. It blows my fucking mind every time when you give people that opportunity to speak, what will come out of their mouth. And it's always just a blast. And I'm stoked on it. And, just check in with someone. It doesn't have to be a good thing or a bad thing. But give someone a chance to talk and yourself a chance to listen. And with that, listen to this next episode. And please give us a follow on Instagram at Writing Friction and on Twitter, Friction Writing. And as always, just tell people about the show. If you like books, if you know people who like books, if you know people who like to write, whoever the fuck, just tell them. We're doing something cool here. It seems to, be picking up more and more every week. The guests, it's great. I'm stoked. All right, cool, everyone. I will see you later. Peace. What's going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool. Everyone say hello to Jill McCorkle. How are you, Jill?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Not too bad. We were talking just before the podcast. You were surrounded by 3 great little dogs.
They're still here.
And there was. Yeah, no, we were waiting for that. Yeah,
we will behave.
We were waiing for that. Do the dogs hang out with you when you write?
Yes, they do. If they're staying quiet.
Are you in your writing area right now?
I am.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to look behind you at the bookshelf and see what was going on. I'm not sure.
A lot of junk.
Well, yeah, but I was trying to see the books. Sometimes I ask what books are behind people, and you get interesting answers. But I was just trying to see the spines. Anything worth talking about on the shelf?
Oh gosh, I have sort of some recent reads and some anthologies I use for my writing classes. But then in this room, I tend to have a lot of, I got a lot of ghost story books.
Okay.
Mythology, sort of random things that I often use in my work.
So you're going back to reference those, and you'll literally pick them up off the shelf and go back to them?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are you always doing that? I mean, you've written a lot of books at this point. Has that always kind of been your process from the beginning?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I love to, I love for there to be something, I don't know, of interest in my work. And then, so a lot of the books I have in here are books that I've used in various projects. Mm-hmm. So I have quite a few books over here on the Coconut Grove fire and hieroglyphics. Those books are actually propping up my computer to get it the right height for this conversation. So usually I'm surrounded by the books of whatever the most recent project. One of my books years ago had a lot of references to pirates.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of history along the North Carolina coast. So I have a whole pirate section back here.
Well, I mean, obviously, we both have different accents. You have a pleasant accent, and I have an accent from northern New Jersey, which is not as pleasant. But I see you were born and raised in North Carolina, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, has that influenced your work tremendously? Are you an author who really, you write about North Carolina pretty often. Has it always been the case? I mean, is it a place that you just have always held on to? Have you ever left North Carolina?
Oh, yeah. I lived in the Boston area for 20 years.
Oh, okay. Wow.
My kids grew up in the Boston area.
Mm-hmm. But you started your writing career in North Carolina, or no?
Yes, because I grew up here. I went to school here. And then I came back about 12 years ago. Longer, 14 years ago.
Okay. So let's go back to the beginning then. You remember those first pages you started writing?
Ever?
Oh, yeah.
Ever? Oh, I wrote as a kid.
Okay. What were you writing and what were you into?
Some very bad poetry. And, I think as a kid, the whole motivation was the great discovery that I could make myself laugh, I could make myself cry, I could scare myself. So it was this whole power of the imagination and the ability to manipulate emotion. And so I think that was my earliest connection. And then the realization that you could sometimes take whatever you had come up with and have the same effect on others. So it was just something I did growing up that I really loved. I didn't take it seriously. I mean, I had no idea that you could grow up to actually spend your life doing something you love.
Yeah.
And, but it was as an undergraduate in college, I started taking classes and really was hooked then.
Is that when you kind of started to take it a little more seriously?
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I mean, I grew up in a small southern town where basically the writers I knew of were dead, which is not what you aspire to as a kid. So to get to college and actually see relatively somewhat well-respected grown-ups whose whole lives were spent reading and writing and talking about stories. I mean, it was like all the doors blew open, and I thought, whoa, that is really what I would love to do.
And were you writing, I mean, you've written novels and you've written many collections of short stories. Do you remember what you kind of started writing off in the beginning? Were you writing short stories, or were you
I was writing stories. But I was always that person, in workshop where somebody would say, well, this feels like part of something much bigger, So I was sort of, in those early years, always on my way to the longer form. Mm-hmm. And I think if I had to say what what comes most easily. It is the novel for me. But I love the short story form and find it to be quite more of a challenge.
I agree.
For me. And but it's what I always come back to between novels, because I love reading stories and I love teaching stories.
I mean, I'm the same way. I'm a relatively new writer, and I've been touring in bands forever. And I started writing, started taking it seriously 3 or 4 years ago. I didn't go to school for writing. I never took a creative writing class. But I've been reading books since I can open my eyes, right? That being said, I made the idea, I'm like, all right, let me start writing short stories. Looking back 3 years later, I don't know if that was the best idea, because like you said, it's very difficult. The idea of having less but needing more is hard to, it's hard to kind of grasp. And if you're new to the whole art form, I agree. Short stories are not easy to do. And then I wrote a boxing novella, but so I'm like inching my way up towards the full form thing. So were you out of college when you kind of started getting it a little more seriously, when you were writing these stories? And when did you kind of take a crack at that first novel?
Oh, well, I went to grad school right after undergrad. And I went to Hollins College, which at the time it was a master's, but, very much set up like any MFA these days. And there were very few MFA programs at that time. And so that's where my first novel really started taking shape. And my thesis there is a novel that I never published, but it led to the beginning of what then was my first novel.
And what was the name of that first book?
The Cheerleader. I had 2 novels come out at the same time.
Did you write them at the same time?
Well, no, I wrote The Cheerleader, and Algonquin Books was just getting started. And they accepted it, but it was going to be 2 years. And then I had the other one going and finished it. And they decided to bring them out together.
Would a publisher?
That was my beginning.
Would a publisher do that in 2020?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, certainly it was pretty scary at the time to have novel 1 and 2 come out together, because yikes,
I can't think of any other author who's actually.
If one takes a dive, you've got another one on the back burner. But to have 2, but actually it worked to my advantage, because people were interested in this small new house, and it also gave reviewers sort of something to compare and talk about. Because the 2 books were really very different. Well, the first one, very focused first person, and then the second one was the scope of a whole town with a lot of different characters, which probably is where I most like to be. I like the feel of a community
now,
on stage.
When you finish, or when you had a grasp of those 2 novels, or when they were kind of coming to their finish, did you actively pursue an agent trying to get these published? I mean, what's the story behind getting published the first time?
I had an early agent based on a couple of short stories.
Okay.
And so that was in place. My first published work, other than like the small literary magazine where I was an undergrad here in Chapel Hill, my first published story was in 17 magazine.
Very cool. So now I'll ask this question. So these 2 books are out. What happens next? I ask authors, some people think life changes overnight. It tends to not be that way. Are you the kind of person are you working immediately on that next book? Are you
always?
Okay. So now we're on the same page.
I don't let go of work
ever,
unless there's new work.
Oh, wait. So explain that a little more. So you're saying you're not going to dive into that. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, like I don't let go of a project until I have the other idea of what's next. Sort of. I mean, almost always an idea comes up while I'm working on something and it's not part of the new. So you sort of put it on the back burner. And it makes it much easier to let go of a project when you feel satisfied.
Yeah, and now I'm picturing kind of like a DJ spinning tracks. Like the DJ's getting the next track ready while the other tracks, and you're fading him in and out.
Exactly.
Yeah. I find I'm the same way. I mean, I'm kind of constantly working on different things. I try not to expand it too much. And I always say like the Danielle Steele kind of thing where she's working on like 18 books at the same time. But no, that's great to hear because I talk to some authors and it's just, it's one book. That's it.
Right.
Needs to be done. When it's done, then it's done. And to me, that's so stifling because we were talking before the podcast, I have a dog walking business. I'm alone in the woods all day with dogs and ideas are constantly popping all the time. I mean,
I bet.
I have 30 books in my head and it's just, it's finding what, discipline. I talk a lot about that. I'm the kind of person, who I write every day at the same time, it's like showing up for work. I know some authors are kind of, I don't have to write today. And that's great. That's awesome. Are you do you write every day? Are you always at the computer typing away?
I'm not always at the computer. A lot of times I'm out with my own dogs.
Okay, most definitely. So,
I feel like the work is always happening. So it's not. I think one of the greatest moments for me as a writer is when I realized it wasn't like a faucet that was either on or off. It's a good steady drip, all day long. And then sort of storing up for those times when you're really gonna, I like to have a good 3 to 5 hour stretch where I can just really sit down and focus. So on a busy day or a day when I'm teaching, my work might consist more of note taking or going back over notes that I already have and moving parts around. And I like that part of the process. And I always tell my students, I think you get credit for that part of the process. I think you get credit for all that time that you're at the grocery store, in the woods, walking dogs or whatever you're doing. And you're, a lot of times I feel like I'm doing a first draft, and doing some revision before I ever sit down and start working.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So with that idea in mind, you have these 2 novels out. I'm not sure what's going on in your life at that time, but it sounds like you're a fairly disciplined person. You're working with the next idea. What's the process going forward? You're like, now did you feel confident going into the next piece of work, having those 2 books out? Were you kind of like, oh shit, like, what do I do now?
Yeah, no, I felt pretty confident. I think I'm most comfortable and confident when I'm right in the middle of a work, and it feels kind of secretive and protected and removed from everything else, And I think, we're always, I think I'm an optimist in life, so I'm always thinking, oh, well, this is going to be my best one yet, so, so you can keep telling yourself that, whether it's true or not, for about 3 years. So that's not a bad place to be.
Does it take you about 3 years to finish a novel?
It varies. But I think it depends on what else is going on in life. I would say, I tend to go like 3 to 4 years. I mean, when my last novel came out, all these reviews kept saying, I hadn't had a book or a novel in 16 years. But I had written a lot of short stories and a lot of essays, and I had teenagers. I got divorced. I made a major move, started a new major job, remarried. Significant changes in my mother's life, and she has dementia. So it's not like I was sitting around twiddling my thumbs, doing nothing. And I think the whole time taking notes. And as I say, I love the time I spend with stories. So for me, that was very satisfying.
So when you made, I guess, the move from North Carolina to Boston, regardless of what's going on in your personal life, did it kind of affect your writing style, your writing technique, being in a different city, being in a different place?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think the move to Boston and all those years there was really a wonderful experience for me as a writer. And in my new novel, there's a lot of it is focused on the Boston area.
My mother's twin sister lives in Boston. So an ex-girlfriend of mine went to Northeastern. So I spent a lot of time in Boston. I know that city well. But I got to be honest, now that I think about it, I can't think of many Boston authors, books about Boston, like fictional. People write about Massachusetts. But yeah, no, I don't. Can you think of anything that's like Boston specific? I can't really think of anything.
Yeah,
right? I could list a bunch of New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco books off the top of my head, but nothing about Boston. That just came to me right now. I don't know why. But I do love Mike's Pastries in the North End.
It's a great city.
It's an interesting city for sure. Yeah. So before we were doing the podcast, I was doing a little bit of research. I got to admit, reading through your stuff, I had to Google this name. I didn't actually even know him, but you won a prize. And if I mispronounce the name, let me know. John Dos Passos. You won that prize. I had to Google him. I didn't know who he was. And now I'm blown away. I actually just ordered 2 of his books. Have you ever read any of his books?
Yes.
Have you ever read any of his books? No?
I have. It's been a while. Yes.
So you've also written for other publications besides just novels and things like that. Do you approach writing for, you've written, the New York Times, Book Review, Washington Post. Do you approach those things differently than you do long form fiction, even in just how you do the work itself?
You mean like when I'm writing a review or? Oh, yeah. I mean, that feels more like an assignment.
But do you get joy out of it? Or, are you able to split your personality to kind of be that kind of writer? Is it easy for you to do?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I sort of put that on the same channel, with my teaching. Because I spend a lot of time reading and editing and making suggestions on someone else's work, which is a very different place from being in, your own created world.
I've asked this before for some other teachers and authors that I've spoken with, and I've gotten different responses. Do you get inspiration from your students?
I do.
I do. I mean, even the bad writing?
Well, I think that the ongoing discussion about writing is very helpful to me. Sometimes I think we all just having that conversation and saying something out loud sometimes brings clarity. Or it's much easier. I always tell my students that what's so important about workshop is you stand to learn far more from the discussion of someone else's work than the discussion of your own work, because we all sort of, don't want to hear the criticism or that's all you hear. you don't hear all the good parts because you're so focused on this one thing that someone took issue with. And yet when you're looking at someone else's work, taking it apart, looking at how it's put together, it's just much easier to see.
Do you still workshop your material to this day?
Do I?
Yeah, I mean, are you sending it out to friends and people before you kind of?
Yeah, I do. I have I usually send it to a couple of readers, or I think if you have 3 readers out there you trust and any 2 stumble in the same place, then you've got a problem. I mean, if these are people whose opinions you really trust.
Yeah. And again, it's kind of, the doubt is continually talked about on this podcast, of having that doubt, but also having, the self-assurance and to give it out to people and trust their opinion as well. I get stuck in my own head of, this is every day, this is the worst piece of shit I've ever written in my life, but you have to kind of keep going forward. But I mean, being this, much into the game for you, or do you still deal with any of that kind of doubt anymore? I mean, or are you kind of just, I got this shit, this is how I do it?
No, I don't know. I mean, I think it would make me nervous if I ever felt like I didn't need that naked eye from elsewhere, because especially when you're writing something, you have in mind the suspense that's being driven, but when you know the outcome, it's sometimes really hard to know how your little clues and the seeds you're planting along the way are affecting other people. So I'm most interested when I solicit readers, I will then often have questions for them, like, did it occur to you that this might happen later in the novel? Or when did you start to realize X, Y, or Z? And so that's very helpful to me as a writer, to know if what I was planning worked. I mean, I think the bottom line is we all have ideas that we put on the page hoping our readers will see, and very often they don't, but it's still important to me that it's there, and I think you just have to realize that different people might read it in different ways, and if it works for them, then that's a positive.
And did you kind of get that vibe in your newest book when you sent it out? I mean, was it kind of just you were asking those same questions and you were getting responses you wanted to hear?
Yeah, definitely.
And the new book is hieroglyphics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, it focuses on 4 point of view characters. And they're sort of all dealing with loss of some kind or another. The elderly couple, they've just retired from Boston to North Carolina, and each of them lost a parent in childhood to real catastrophic events. Her mother basically went to the Coconut Grove nightclub without telling anyone. And died in that horrific fire. And his father was on a train returning to New England and was in a derailment crash in my native North Carolina county. And so they shared that experience. And then there's a young single mother, Shelley, who works as a court stenographer. And she's basically running from everything in her past. And her little boy, Harvey's struggling and, sort of dealing with the loss of his dad who has left. So I've got him at all ages, but sort of experiencing something, similar emotion, very different ways.
And per what you were saying, this idea came into your head when you were working on something else. I mean,
yeah.
Right? Yeah, right. I mean, so yeah, the idea that we can create whole other universes while being stuck in another universe and still be able to kind of, it's important for people to hear that, to be able to be, it doesn't just have to be one singular thing. I think that's super. It helps your ego. It helps, so many things to kind of just be able to and step out somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jill, this has been an absolute pleasure. I always ask at the end, if you can, give a shout out to your favorite bookstore. Where are people going to buy your books from?
Oh, that's great. Well, I just love the independent booksellers across this country. My local ones would be Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill, Quail Ridge Books in Raleigh, McIntyre's Books, Farrington Village here in North Carolina. The Purple Crow, which is this wonderful little, it's kind of like the shop around the corner here in Hillsborough, North Carolina.
Any Boston shout-outs?
Oh, absolutely. Brookline Booksmith and Newtonville Books and the Harvard Bookstore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You ever you've been to Newberry Comics, right?
I love Newberry Comics.
Oh, yeah. We love it all.
Absolutely. The Framingham as well as there in the city.
Most
Newberry.
definitely. And are you do social media? Are you on Twitter or Facebook, any of that stuff,
I'm
Instagram?
on Facebook.
Okay.
I'm not on Twitter.
Okay. And people can get into, they can find out whatever they want from you, website, all that stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
The website's probably the best.
All right. Well, Jill, thanks so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. It looks like it's sunny outside.
Thank you, Michael. I've loved meeting you. And
Most definitely. All right. And give those 3 dogs a good pet for me, please.
Oh, I will. 2 Bernese and a Labradoodle.
And I got a mini bulldog who's I can hear ready to get out.
So cute. So cute. What's her name?
Reba.
Oh, that's cute. After Reba McEntire?
No, but that's now the curse that I have from naming her Reba. No, it's actually a song. You see the posters behind me. I'm a big fan of this band called Fish, and they have a song called Reba.
I know Fish. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, you're talking to a guy who's seen Fish a lot. Yeah.
So has my nephew, and I think my son has a couple of times.
I'm trying to think if I've seen them in North Carolina. I don't know if I have.
You Fish people have been everywhere.
Everywhere. All right. People on the podcast don't want to hear about Fish. All right, Jill, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks again so much.
Well, listen, thank you, Michael. A pleasure to meet you.
Yes. Enjoy the rest of the day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
What's going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool. Everyone say hello to Crissy Van Meter. How are you, Crissy?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
Not too bad. We were discussing before, you're in the middle of a move, hence the Elvis Warhol behind you.
On the floor.
On the floor. I mean, is it going to go on the wall behind you?
I mean, eventually. I don't know. I kind of like it, actually. I might just leave it. I don't want to put holes in the wall either. I feel like that's a pain in the ass.
It's interesting when we move where things end up, right? Like you could see behind me 2 posters and a guitar. Yeah. I mean, when I moved into this new apartment a couple months ago, it didn't. That's not where that was.
A couple months. Okay.
Yeah, no, I moved. Yeah, I mean, we're talking in what? It's January 2021, right? I think, right? Who even fucking knows? But yeah, I moved to SF from Jersey. We were talking before. I moved here 9-10 years ago to play in a band. But you're a Los Angeles gal, right?
Yeah, I'm
born and raised.
So my grandfather grew up on Sawtell, which is in like Santa Monica, West LA, and then in the 50s, my grandparents moved to North Orange County, right off the 5, so like 15 miles from downtown LA. So I grew up in Fullerton. It's actually right next to Disneyland. So so between LA and Orange County.
I've toured in bands for a long time, and I've been in LA a bunch. But there's a club in Fullerton now. The 55. There's a 5 in it. It'll come to me.
Been back there in a really long time. I know that I graduated high school in 2002, so I have not been to any of the, because there's Cal State Fullerton there, so there's like cool clubs and stuff now, but I never did any of that there. So
were you writing back then?
Yeah, I was writing like really shitty rhyming poetry like in high school. I just recently found all those notebooks, and they're just, I mean, like literally rhyming like about trees and bees and just bad things. But I guess I was writing. I don't think I thought of myself as a writer, but I was writing.
Were you going to school for any kind of creative writing? I mean, what were you doing in college? Where did you go to college? What did you do?
Yeah, so I barely graduated high school.
Okay, same here.
Yeah, whatever.
Thanks, Algebra 2.
I don't even think I passed Algebra 2. And then after high school, I went to community college in Newport Beach for 2 years. And then, so I just partied. And then
Newport Beach.
The way I went to university was I got a full ride athletic scholarship and then ended up at San Diego State. And I studied English. So I was like, that was like in my head, but I didn't even know like what an MFA was until I think like my senior year of college. My teacher was like, hey, you should like think about writing. And I was like, okay. And I did eventually end up getting an MFA in New York City at the New School. I moved out there though for work. And then I just went to the New School because it was like super close to my office and just did the MFA there. So I have an MFA.
Okay. Well, we'll get to all that for sure. I want to ask. You said athletics. What kind of athletics?
Yeah. So I was on the crew team. So rowing. I'm really tall, so it was just like super easy to get a scholarship. They basically teach you how to row. I didn't know how to do that, and I met the coach, and she's like, "Oh my God, you're so tall. Like you should try this." And she's like, "There's scholarships available." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll try this." So that's what I did for 4 years of my life.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm a chubby, shorter Jewish guy from New Jersey. So like to me, the sports I had available were skateboarding and playing like punk rock music. So that's kind of what I did. But there weren't any scholarships for that, unfortunately. There
should be.
I mean, at this point, who fucking knows? But so you mentioned MFA. We've talked to some authors. They have their MFAs. We talked to some authors. They can't even spell MFA. What was your route through that? I mean, you said you were in New York City. Was it your first time in New York when you moved there? Had you ever been there before?
No, I had been there one weekend to visit a friend in Bay Ridge.
Bay Ridge?
That's where I ended up moving to Bay Ridge.
Yeah, most definitely.
I started out of college as like a sports journalist. So I actually ended up moving to New York City to cover surfing and skateboarding and snowboarding for ESPN. So
wait a second. You moved from the epicenter of skateboarding, literally the epicenter, to where you can only skate for a couple of months at. Who were you writing for?
ESPN. So they had X Games. And at the time, I think when I went there, it was called EXPN, and then we changed it to like ESPN Action Sports, and now it's just solely X Games.
That was going to be my question. What era of action sports?
All of them. I actually, if you're a skateboarder, you'll know this. I started working for 411 VM. That's what.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, so I skated as a kid.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if you continue.
Yeah, so I moved out there for work to Bay Ridge, and then we ended up moving to downtown Brooklyn. But I had never really been to New York. But I got the job and I said, fuck it. And I went. And so while I was out there, I decided to apply to MFAs, and I applied to NYU and the New School because they were closest to my office, and I got into the New School. So I went, and I don't know. I think, everybody has I feel like strong opinions about the MFA. I don't really have one. I think it was like a cool experience, but I was working full time. I wasn't that involved. I met some cool people. But I don't know. I don't have feeling one way or the other. I know that it's like for some reason some sort of controversial topic for people, but
and I didn't know that. I mean, I don't have one, right? I came to writing at the age of 30 because I was touring in bands forever, and I started writing in my free time, and it was something but I've always been a big reader. But the MFA thing, before I started this podcast, I didn't even think it was just you. But man, holy shit, people have some honest opinions about it I mean. They certainly vocalize. I won't name any specific names of people who've been on the podcast before. You can go listen to them. But that's an interesting thing. And it's an interesting thing that you bring that up. I mean, looking back on it now, some authors have talked about it where they thought that maybe it might have actually hindered them in the beginning of their career. Since you just released your first book, talk about that. I mean, do you think it helped you become a better writer? I mean, was it, where do you sit now having that degree?
So I guess this is I don't know. I think one thing I've heard from agents, and like I did the cold calling agent thing, so I got to
we'll
talk to a
get
lot
to
of
that
different-
for sure.
Yeah, so weird. But I certainly think that the MFA, especially if it's paid for, that's one thing I would say with any school at this point now. Like, go to school if it's paid for. Otherwise, like, don't fucking do it. But I think the MFA gives you like a sense of confidence. You know, like it's kind of hard to like all you need to be a writer is just to write. So it kind of gives you like a level of confidence. I think the community part's pretty cool, but I think agents, certainly if you have a really good MFA, I think take you very seriously. And, you know, you're kind of in like a cohort of special people. I think I've always just my life been somewhere right in the middle, like floating along. So I don't know if for me it was like some big factor. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Well, I don't, because I don't have an MFA, right? So, but I'm going to ask you the questions about it and things like that. I mean, you know, again, people are they get pissed off every time I talk about it. Coming from the music world and the publishing world run parallel businesses in my mind. How they go about releasing products, how they distribute, you know, all these things. Yeah. That's another conversation. But that being said, with that, you know, you're like you said, you're cold calling agents. I mean, bands are cold calling, you know, A&R reps. It used to be like that. When you were writing, I mean, you know, first off, your first new novel, it's called Creatures. But when you were writing it, I mean, was that the idea you had in mind? I mean, were you wanted to finish this book and you were just going to go spearhead that campaign?
Oh, no. I mean, I think actually, I certainly think in terms of like making art, and this translate to like any art, you obviously want to get paid, but at the root of it, that's not why you're doing it. And I think if you focus on that, you're going to make really bad shit. So, I mean, because I had the MFA, I knew already sort of the process and structure. I think that's another thing an MFA gives you. Like, you kind of see how it happens because you have professors, or, you know, it's just kind of part of the deal. So you sort of know a little bit more about publishing, the industry itself, than maybe you would if you were just Googling it and looking at blogs. But no, I think when I started the book, I did it for me, and I just had to do it, and I wanted to do it. And then it became bigger and bigger, and I felt more serious about it over time. And I kind of knew eventually that that would be the piece I would send out to agents. But I had no expectations. I mean, I'm making myself sound really bad here. I feel like I have no expectations for anything. So I just kind of was like, whatever, I did this thing, and like, we'll see what happens.
My first book came out in February, and, you know, 3 weeks before the world shut down, and I got 73 rejections. Janet Fitch talked about having a wall that she paper mached full of rejections. Did you have to deal with any of that, or was it kind of, I mean, you know?
So actually my story is kind of unique in this way. I think because I held on to my book alone for so long. And
when did you start writing it?
I think it took me altogether, I don't know, like 3 years. So not that long. The book is actually kind of a slim novel. So it's not like some epic proportion of thing. But I think I didn't really share it with anyone, not even agents, not even really friends or anything. Maybe a few here and there. So I really made it exactly how I wanted. So I certainly got rejections from agents. But then when I started having the conversation with agents, when I did sign with my agent, we did kind of minimal editing because I had spent so long. I mean, I probably could have done this a lot sooner, but I just...
How many drafts did you do?
I don't know. Well, I write in like weird small sections, and actually my book is in a whole bunch of small, tiny chapters and skips around in time. So I wrote sections of it over time. And I'd say the drafting for me is more of like a puzzle, putting together a puzzle, especially because of the form I was working with. I don't know, I guess like 3 huge drafts and then like a whole bunch of tiny puzzle pieces in terms of that. And then we did one edit with my agent, and then we sold it, which was pretty cool.
Did you have that style about in your mind when you first started, you wanted the book to be that way?
No. So my book is kind of based on my own life a little bit, as all cliched debut novels are. Right. I mean, whatever.
I wrote a novella. I'm just about to be finished with my debut novel. So but it's about a rock and roll band.
There you go.
So I was very cognizant of being, you know, you have to be careful about that.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. But I think when I set out to write it, at the time I was thinking a lot about grief. I had lost my dad, and in the book, a girl loses her dad. And so I kind of started with those pieces. And then as I kept, it felt like more building, where like I would get a draft and it was like one kind of flat layer. And then I was like, there needs to be more here. And so I kind of kept building and adding, and then kind of came up with the structure and all the layers of time and things toward the end. But no, certainly when I started, even now on projects I work on, I never know where it's going. I really envy people that like outline and all of that.
Do you know a lot of authors? I mean, through this podcast, I haven't met many that do that. It seems like they all have no clue what they're doing when they first start a project.
I think I have to say, when you first start a project, especially if, thinking about the way art works in our subconscious and our mind, I think it'd be impossible to say, this is what I'm going to do. And even if it is, I think it changes just organically over time as you're doing it. But I certainly know people that as they kind of get going, start outlining and keeping track. And, I feel like a total hot mess because my shit's like splayed all over the floor. I'm like piecing it together and printing it out. So I think there are more organized people than me. And certainly, at least further along in the process, I think that's, I don't know, maybe a good thing.
Well, what was your routine like when you were writing for those 3 years? I mean, were you working full time? Were you teaching? What were you doing?
Yeah, so I was working full time as a journalist, and I would go to my horrible, shitty media job, and I would open an email, pretend I was drafting an email to like a coworker, but I was just writing like chapter notes and like chapters. So I wrote all of the. I wrote that entire novel while I was working full time. I don't know. So I didn't have a routine. So it's actually weird now because now I work from home. I mean, we all do, but
yeah, now
I just freelance and I don't work full time anymore in that capacity. And I work on like other sort of creative projects and I teach on the side. So I wish I had a routine. I'd keep trying to make one, but I just like suck at that. Really.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a whack job. I'm like obsessed with my routine,
Oh, that's great.
In a way, right? I mean, to my dating life, it's been awful, but for, routine, things like that, It's just, for me, it's like, I'm always the dude, like from 7 to 8, I know if I can get that shit done before work. Like I own a dog walking business and it allows me, everyone knows Reba's chewing on a bone somewhere. There she is.
Reba.
And so that has allowed me to kind of create a routine. But yeah, I mean, I find times where you have to fucking write when you're doing laundry. I don't know about you, but I'm not one for motivation to kind of hit me and wait for it to happen. But I'm also working on 3 things at once. You work on one thing at a time?
You are like the person I want to be. No, it's very hard for me to keep a schedule. I absolutely write when inspiration strikes. It often happens where for like a week straight, I'll just write at night, like all night.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
like
crazy. I'm the total opposite. I love this. This is great. But you're able to just are you distracted easily by phones and things like that? I mean, no, you could turn that stuff off.
Yeah. Well, I'm an only child and I spent most of my life alone because I have like crazy parents. So I feel like quarantine has not really been that hard for me because I don't know, I'm kind of used to this. I also live with my husband, so I'm not alone all the time, but I'm pretty able to like hone in on something. I think the bigger issue for me is like, there will be sometimes, long stretches where I can't do shit. And then I'm just like, oh, I feel anxious and terrible about myself and hate myself. And it's like this self-loathing sort of, cycle.
Well, with the journalist job and, writing about, skateboarding, things like that, I mean, you had to write. I mean, you couldn't wait for inspiration to come find you, right? Yeah,
but that's such different writing, I think.
Exactly.
But yes, I think, and I worked as an editor. That's what I did for so long. And I actually think now I worked as an editor for about 10 years. And I think that's been really, really helpful because that's the discipline, right? It's like, if you're putting out 5 stories a day, either your own or other people's, and there's deadlines. So like, I know I can do it.
Yeah.
I think that was like a good training for my brain. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, like, to me, I know if I put it off, the procrastination, the anxiety, the Jewish guilt will just it'll eat me away and I won't be able to do it. But it's, but that's what makes the world go around. That's awesome. Yeah. So you sold the novel. It came out. I mean, a couple of quick questions I asked with debut novelists, do you remember that first reading that you did? I mean, were you ever reading out before, like in school? Were you doing that part of your MFA
program? I never did it. I was really bad at the new school because I was working full time. So I was so tired. So I like never went, and I traveled a ton for work.
Yeah.
So I never I didn't participate as much as I wanted to. And I don't like reading. I actually get really nervous. Now I don't as much because of teaching. So it's fine.
Yeah.
But my book came out January 7th, 2020. So I had like a full month of cool bookstore.
Which I was on the website. You were on a little tour. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool. But then, kind of abruptly, of course, came to a halt. But my first reading was in LA, and it was just my friends. So that was so chill. And then the book tour is exactly what everyone says. Some places, tons of people show up. Some places 4 people show up.
Yeah.
And it's super weird.
It's like playing in a band.
Totally. It's I guess I'm grateful either way. So it was just cool to have the experience, especially since this year or last year, all the books, as you know, that came out, it's just sucked for everybody. Just sucked, hands down sucked. So I got a little taste of it, but yeah, readings are okay. I feel indifferent.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah. I mean, again, we're talking, people are going to listen to this 2-3 years from now, probably, but the thing is just we're talking at a time where it's just, we're literally fucking stuck on we can't do anything. I was able to do one reading, and it was the end of February. It was when people were bumping elbows, and people showed up, people didn't show up. And,
where was the reading?
I was in a dope a jazz venue down. Have you been in San Francisco? Yeah, down in the Mission. I booked it. I did it all myself. I was looking at your website. You were at I'm wearing their shirt coincidentally. Were you at Green Apple? Did you read?
They have a Black Flag Green Apple shirt. That's
they have the best.
Cool.
They have the best merch there.
I noticed that. I was like, is that a Green Apple book?
Yeah.
I went there. That was actually a really weird event for me. Because that was the most random. I ended up having some random family members come that were asking personal questions during the Q&A, and I was like, what the fuck? And then I had just random people I didn't know. I think that was my second stop. So it was just a totally new. That was the first time I went somewhere I didn't know people. So it was I love that bookstore though. It was great.
Yeah, no, Green Apple's dope. So what are you working on right now? I mean, are you doing anything right now? I mean, do you even have another book in you? Do you give a shit? Are you one and done?
No, I'm not one and done. I'm working on some pretty cool TV and film stuff.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? You don't have to tell about what you're working on specifically, but can you talk a little bit about the difference between writing for film and TV as opposed to a novel?
Yeah. Totally a different flex. I think it's a nice break from writing the novel. And originally when I started writing in college and playing around with it was screenwriting that I started with because I'm a crazy movie TV.
Was that growing up in LA? You think had anything to do with that or no?
No, I think it was because I was alone all the time and I watched TV 24 hours a day. I still watch a ton of TV. It's my life. And when I meet people who are not into that, I'm just I don't trust you. It's weird. But it's a different muscle. And I think I am working on a novel, but really slowly. And I think writing the TV and film stuff is, in a way, because it's all plot driven. I don't like to write a lot of plot in my literary fiction. So it's a kind of nice change. And it's you're using a different muscle and you're focusing on dialogue and actually being in scene. And it's actually pretty fun. But I think the combo of being able to also come back to the novel and sort of go into your subconscious and crazy brain is also kind of fun too.
Yeah, we talked to Mark Layner. You probably don't know who he is, but he's been, he does everything. But he did a couple movies with John Cusack and things like that, and worked with him and wrote some scripts for that. And he was saying, he was just nowadays it's almost just you just type a sentence in a program and it spits it out for you. You have a whole. Pretty much. I mean, in another world, long time ago, I was in New York City working, doing the audio stuff for film and television.
That's
so I was
cool.
I was doing editing audio sound effects. I did that for years in Manhattan. And I tell the story a couple of times, but the woman who, one of the women who worked there for a short time as a receptionist, she pitched her screenplay to Matthew McConaughey, Tom, because as they walked in the door, they were and I was the low person on the totem pole, and it stuck with me so much, just thinking to myself, just you can't ever do that. Like, that's just not how you ever, you don't approach.
Did she pull it off? Did she ever?
I mean, what do you think?
I thought this was like going to be like a cool, happy ending story.
Oh God, no. I mean, it got pretty sad at the end, but no. But yeah, but I always thought about that. Interesting. Okay, cool. So you said you're working on a slow novel. You're kind of dripping it out, and you're screenwriting. Well, this has been a blast talking to you. Where are you on social media? You do Twitter, Instagram, anything like that?
Oh, I'm so bad at Twitter. I'm on there. But I'm on Instagram. That's like all I can handle. And I'm like medium good at that. But
what's your handle? You want people to
follow
follow
you
or no?
Just my name, Crissy Van Meter.
Crissy, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks
so
much.
Most definitely. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Later.
Bye.